Hello my dear friends, you're in the Military Summary channel. In this video we're going to discuss the most important events that took place during the previous 12 hours. We have lots of very interesting updates, so let's start. And first we're going to talk about possible negotiations without the main negotiator, without Zelensky. That was stated by Donald Trump. Zelensky is doing a poor job of negotiating, Trump said. He has been a very poor negotiator. Trump called his recent conversation with Putin very good, emphasizing that he then had not such good negotiations with Ukraine. Let's discuss this in details. Zelensky has no trump cards for negotiations with Russia. It is better to hold negotiations without him. The US president wants to hold peace talks in Ukraine without Zelensky. I don't think he is important enough to be at the meeting, Trump told CBS News. Treasury Secretary Bizant had a wasted trip to Kiev. This is the trip when the US wanted to force Zelensky to sign this rare metals agreement. But from the other side, Putin wants to make a deal, although he does not need to make a deal because if he wanted, he would have all of Ukraine. Zelensky was not invited to talks with Russia because he has not negotiated well so far, because he allowed the war and did not end it earlier. The war started because Biden and Zelensky said the wrong things. Russia could have been easily talked out of it. You know that the situation is that the United States of America and Trump personally doesn't care who to sign deal with. They can sign a deal with Ukraine, and according to this possible deal, Ukraine will be forced to pay the United States of America 40-50 billions. We're talking about, of course, rare metals. But at the same time, the US can sign almost the same deal with Russia, and the terms are almost the same. For example, this is the map, and this is unconfirmed. First of all, Russian conditions for ending the Ukraine war include Odessa Oblast to bring Transnistria home. The US rare earth interest areas lay just beyond the areas marked in orange, so there is more than a fair chance that Washington will also push to implement the Russian territorial claim. So as you can see, Trump has talks with Russia and with Ukraine on the same matter. 450 billion should be returned back to the United States of America, and Trump doesn't care who will pay this money, either the Russians or the Ukrainians. So that's why he's trying to play on this matter, and he tried to get as much as possible benefits from this situation. Now let's move further. Let's discuss additional details. According to information we have, 64% of Ukrainians support direct negotiations with Russia. And probably this is the only way how to stop conflict and how not to sign any peace agreement and any deal with the United States of America, to begin elections and to capitulate. But we understand that most likely Zelensky is never going to accept this. Now let's move further. Today we got a very interesting statement from Poland. A few minutes ago, President Zelensky called me. That was stated by Andrzej Duda. We had a candid conversation on the heels of the recent meetings with General Kellogg and other developments. I conveyed to him that we consistently believe that there is no other way to stop bloodshed and achieve lasting peace in Ukraine except with the support of the United States. For this reason, I suggested to President Zelensky to remain committed to the course of calm and to constructive cooperation with Donald Trump. So basically, Polish President Andrzej Duda advised Zelensky to shut up and to stop being rude to Trump. Obviously, very interesting. But when talking about Europe, we see that Europe is not ready for negotiations because Europe also wants to have a big part of this piece of cake. For example, today we got some interesting statements from the candidate for German Chancellor Merz. Germany should negotiate with France and Britain and use its nuclear weapons to protect Ukraine territory amid changing US rhetoric. We must prepare for the fact that Donald Trump will no longer fully fulfill his obligations to help under the NATO treaty. According to him, the French authorities have already approached the German government several times with the proposal to discuss nuclear guarantees for Ukraine, but so far Berlin has not responded. France and Great Britain have their own nuclear weapons, but the potential of the two countries is several times smaller than Russia's nuclear stockpiles. Germany has American nuclear weapons and no nuclear weapons of its own, but in the event of a war, Luftwaffe bombers can use US nuclear shells. Now let's discuss opinions and statements made by European Union, because we have lots of very interesting updates. For example, Bloomberg and Political stated that European Union prepares new 20 billion military aid package for Ukraine, and that's a lot of money. And obviously, this money will be enough for Ukraine to hold in this war with Russia for another 4 or 5 months, which is maybe even enough to hold positions until the end of the negotiation process. But on the same time, we got report that Trump gave Europe 3 weeks to sign Ukraine's capitulation. Newsweek quotes Mika Altola and writes that the is referring to peace map is referring to peace agreement proposed by Trump. If we don't do this, the US will leave Europe. So it's very complicated game. We see that every single side plays in their own favor. We see different alliances, we see different positions, but anyway, we see that the situation develops not in Ukrainian favor. And we see that the world is trying to cut Ukraine in pieces, and everybody wants to get as big as possible piece of cake. Now let's discuss the situation on the ground. We have lots of very interesting updates, and first we're going to discuss the South Donetsk direction. Today, according to pro-Ukrainian sources, the Russians managed to improve their positions and to take another tree line between the company's stronghold that located to the northwest of Velika Novoselovka and the settlement of Privilye. Most likely, the Russians are trying to cut this company's stronghold from supply and support, which will allow the Ukrainians sooner or later to fall back from this territory or being encircled by the Russian forces. So we expect that the situation in this area is going to be developed this way. Furthermore, according to different sources, after the Russians managed to secure the settlement of Cheretovate, the Russians began testing Ukrainian defense in the next settlement to the north, the village of Skudne. So most likely, during the next several days, we're going to start receiving first updates from this area as well. Now let's move to the Bogatyr direction. Today, the pro-Ukrainian mappers, Ukraine's deep state source, confirmed that the Russians indeed managed to establish complete control over more than 75% of the village. But the Ukrainians still say that there are still territories that are covered with the fog of war or considered as a contested area, which means that according to the Ukrainians, there is still resistance of the armed forces of Ukraine. Furthermore, we got geolocation from the settlement of Andreevka that allowed us to adjust the map in the most western part of the settlement. And today, as you can see, according to the geolocation published by the Ukrainian side, we have colored the settlement of Andreevka almost completely in Russian favor. There are just several blocks in the most northern part and in the most western part that are still remains in the area of the gray zone. But most likely during the next several days, the Minister of Defense of Russian Federation will confirm control over this territory. Anyway, the situation for the Ukrainians in Constantinople is very, very difficult. And most likely during the next 3 days, the Russians will do everything they can with the purpose to encircle the settlement of Constantinople and to force the Ukrainians to fall back. Obviously, the Ukrainians have no chances to hold their positions in the village, and they would be forced to fall back in the very near future. Otherwise, they would be caught in cauldron by the Russian forces, and they will repeat the destiny of the Ukrainians that were caught in cauldron in Dachne, Ulakle, and in the area of Ugledar. Now let's move further. We got lots of very interesting updates from the Siversk direction. During the previous 24 hours, maybe 48 hours, the Russians intensified their activities. First, the Russians bombed and destroyed lots of temporary deployment points in the city of Slaviansk. This is the main base for the Ukrainians, for this group of Ukrainian forces, who's responsible for the Siversk direction. A lot of explosions, a lot of warehouses were destroyed. Furthermore, according to information we have, the Russians managed to improve their positions in the area of Bilogorovka and Verkhnekamenskaya. The Ukrainian sources published the video of another Russian attack in this area, and in this video we might see how the Russians tried to land infantry in this, let's say, concentration of tree lines, and as a result of Russian offensive, these tree lines were captured and secured by the Russians. Furthermore, according to information we have, according to pro-Russian resources, during the previous 24 hours, the Russians managed to establish complete control over the main stronghold in the area of Bilogorovka. So the Russians are saying after the fall of this stronghold, the Ukrainians have no chances to hold their positions in this area, and most likely in the very near future, the Ukrainians will start retreat process towards more reliable positions. So we see that the turning point in the battle for Siversk was passed by the Russians several weeks ago, and now it's just a process how the Russians are going to move further and further in the western direction. Now let's discuss the situation in the northern Kupiansk direction. Today, pro-Ukrainian sources published video how they were bombing and attacking the soldiers and units of the armed force of Russian Federation in small settlement of Topoli along the border with the Russian Federation. Based on the video that was published by the Ukrainian side, we have colored the contested area into the area under complete Russian control. So now we have no doubts that this settlement was secured and captured by the Russians. And now let's discuss the situation in the Sudzha direction, where we continue receiving lots of very interesting updates and details. As you know, currently the main clashes and the main activities are taking place in the area between the settlements Darina, Nikolaeva, Darina, Basovka, Novenka, Sverlikova. There are very heavy clashes, and I'll remind you that Vladimir Putin, the president of Russian Federation, several days ago reported that the Russians crossed the border approximately in this area and managed to improve their positions and to get deeper inside of the territories Ukraine. Later, we got reports that when Ukrainians realized that they have huge problems in this area, the Ukrainians began bringing more and more forces in this direction with the purpose to stabilize the situation and not to allow the Russians to break through, to continue their breakthrough. And the Russian sources reported that most likely the Ukrainians managed to achieve this, but the problem is that Ukrainians managed to achieve this by paying significant price, because this stabilization was achieved by the Ukrainians not with the use of regular army or something like this. They were forced to use special forces, special trained forces, well equipped, probably the core of Ukrainian army, and these special forces suffered significant losses during this stabilization. Anyway, as a result of clashes in this area, according to different sources, according to very reliable pro-Russian sources, the settlement of Novenki was captured and secured. This is a very small settlement, just one street and several buildings, but as you can see, there is a forest that can be used by the Russians as the natural defense barrier for further concentration, accumulation of forces, and possible offensive operation further in the direction of N07 road. So we see that the news around the Sudzha direction is tightening, and the situation for the Ukrainians is getting worse and worse every single day. And that's it for the short video. Military Summary channel reminds we condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for your watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.